The council chamber of the interstellar Concord was a cathedral of alien power, a vast ring of obsidian alloy, lit by shafts of cold blue light filtering from the star lorn beyond the panoramic dome. 23 banners of alien empires hung from the vaulted spires. Each symbol shimmered faintly, representing centuries of dominance, treaties, and wars. Only one banner looked new, the cobalt and white insignia of Earth, still too young to have gathered dust. Elias Grant stood at the central dais, hands clasped behind his back, his dark uniform tailored with crisp precision. The air smelled faintly metallic, recycled, filtered, sterile. Before him, the council gathered. Amphibious envoys rippling with moisture, avian diplomats perched on steel perches, silicon-based entities flickering with faint inner light. And at the far end, elevated above them all, sat the Carthage sovereign. Kardvek Zur leaned forward, his scaled fingers drumming the black stone table with deliberate weight. His body was a monument of muscle and hardened plates, green-black and gleaming under the lights. Eyes like molten amber locked on Elias with predatory patience. "You will deliver your answer, human," Karthvek hissed, voice low and rough as a grinding blade. "Your species is multiplied across 7 systems. You extract or from sectors marked for Carthid inheritance. You establish fleets where none were permitted. Tribute is owed. Submission is required." A murmur rippled through the chamber, not of support, but of expectation. Everyone had heard the ultimatum 3 days prior. Hand over Earth's outer colonies, dismantle half the fleet, and pay resource tithe for 50 years. In return, survival. Elias met that molten gaze without blinking. His face, lined from campaigns past, betrayed nothing. Only his eyes moved, flicking briefly toward the council's other factions. The cautious Veil merchants, the silent Crystalline Thorn, the predatory but restless Zari clans. They watched, but none offered rescue. "Your conditions were heard," Elias said finally. His voice was calm, low, the tone of a man who had negotiated ceasefires on burning frontiers. And they were refused. The words hung in the cold air. A flicker of something passed across the sovereign's jagged features. Amusement, then disdain. Refused. Karthvek's laugh rumbled like tectonic movement. "Do you believe the Concord will bleed for your fragile species? You are tolerated, human, because you have not yet learned your place." Elias stepped forward, his boots echoing softly on the inlaid metal floor. "We know our place," he said. "It is on the frontier, building, surviving, standing when others would kneel." The sovereign's tail lashed once, a heavy sound against the stone. "Then kneel now, before your colonies burn." Elias let the silence stretch. Around them, the counselors shifted, some intrigued, others uneasy. The Veil ambassador, a spindly being draped in mirrored silk, leaned to its aid and whispered something about human arrogance. A Crystalline Thorn delegate flickered a sharp pulse of amber light. "Caution." "No," Elias said simply. The single word cracked the air. Karthvek's had lifted, crest plates rising like a serpent disturbed. "No." His voice dropped to a growl. "You dare reject a dominion? Your fleets are specks before our armadas. Your worlds are dust beneath our thrusters." Elias didn't move. "Then you know what comes next," he said, his voice steady. "You want war? We'll bring it." For the first time, the chamber stilled completely. Even the ambient hum of the environmental regulators seemed to fade. The words carried no shout, no roar, but they cut through the sovereign's threat like a blade through silk. A declaration not of bluster, but of promise. The Carthage delegation erupted. Advisors hissed. One slammed a clawed hand on the table. "This is madness," barked one scaled general. "Your kind will drown in the first wave." Elias raised a hand, palm outward, halting the noise as if conducting an invisible orchestra. His gaze never left Karthvek's. "You came here to demand submission." Elias said, "I came to preserve peace. But peace is not built on threats. Not with us." He turned slightly, addressing the council now, his voice carrying across the chamber. "The Dominion claims we trespassed. They claim we took what was theirs. I ask, where's the treaty that names those systems? Where's a concordant map that marks those worlds? There is none. Only their word and their hunger. The Thorin flickered again, this time in pale blue. Interest. A few minor delegates exchanged glances. Seeds planted. Karthvek's claws flexed. You accuse us of fabrication before this council? You, a child among stars. I accuse you of tyranny dressed as law, Elias said, his tone unchanging. The sovereign leaned forward, fangs glinting. Then your worlds will be ash. Elias inclined his head, as if receiving a dinner invitation rather than a death sentence. Perhaps, he said, or perhaps they will be the line where your empire finally stops. The sovereign rose to his full height, plates scraping the vaulted ceiling. 7 cycles, he said, voice now a cold decree. In 7 cycles we return. Surrender or extinction. He swept from the chamber, his entourage flowing behind him like a living tide of steel and scale. Doors sealed. The temperature seemed to drop. Elias remained at the dais, still as carved stone, until the last echo of their departure faded. A young aide approached. Lieutenant Marrakes, face pale beneath the dim lights. Sir, you just declared war. Elias's jaw tightened. He turned his gaze toward the stars burning cold and distant beyond the dome. No, he murmured. I just told the truth. Around the chamber, whispers resumed. Deals would be struck in shadows tonight. Old empires would measure risk and reward. And far beyond this station, in the silent docks of Earth's frontier, fleets would stir. The council chamber was empty now, its obsidian walls dimmed to a subdued glow. Outside the panoramic dome, Elorin's pale star slid behind the station's girders, painting streaks of cold light across the polished floor. Elias Grant remained alone at the dais for a moment longer, eyes fixed on the void where the Carthage sovereign had stood hours before. 7 cycles. That was the deadline carved into the galaxy's skin. He turned sharply and left, coat swaying at his heels. The corridors of the orbital council citadel were a maze of polished alloy and alien architecture. Curved panels shimmered with faint energy signatures. Conduits hummed beneath semi-transparent floors. Delegates moved in cautious clusters. Voices hushed, tendrils curling, antennae twitching. Word of the confrontation had already spread. Lieutenant Marrakes fell into step beside him, datapad in hand. Her face was composed now, the initial shock replaced by focus. 3 factions have requested private audiences, sir. The Veil, the Thorn Collective, and the Free Clans. Expected, Elias said. His voice carried none of the iron from the chamber. Here, it was calculation that weighed his words. Who's first? The Veil. They sent an encrypted summons to the lower conference tier. He nodded. Good. They'll want to profit from this. The Veil ambassador awaited them in a circular room lined with mirrored panels that doubled as both decoration and surveillance. The creature, tall, narrow, draped in flowing reflective silk, inclined its narrow head, its eyes like pools of black mercury. Human envoy, it said, voice liquid, your defiance has stirred the void. The Dominion does not issue threats idly. I'm aware, Elias replied, taking the offered seat but keeping his posture straight. You didn't call me here to warn me. The ambassador's silk shifted with a soft ripple. Correct. We are merchants, not saviors. But a destabilized trade lane serves no one. The Carthage claims, are they authentic? No, Elias said. He didn't flinch, didn't couch it in careful phrasing. They want the Torvac corridor, rich in hyperminerals, rare isotopes. They claim inheritance by ancient charter. I've reviewed the archives. That charter never existed. The ambassador's fingers tapped against the table, producing a muted chime. If this is true, evidence must surface before the council. Words alone will not shift the Dominion. I have fragments, Elias admitted. Supply ledgers, falsified star maps traced to their cartographers. Not enough for a public strike yet. The Veil tilted its head, intrigued. And you seek our networks to trace the rest. Elias allowed himself the smallest of smiles. You read quickly. For a heartbeat, silence lingered between them. Then the ambassador's silk shimmered again, a ripple of faint blue light. We will consider it. But trade is never free. I expected nothing less, Elias said, standing. "Send me your terms." As they stepped out, Mara exhaled quietly. "You gave them bait." "Bait they already wanted to bite," Elias murmured. Merchants always calculate loss first, profit second. They moved on. Hours bled into the station's artificial night. Elias met with the Thorin next, crystalline entities whose bodies refracted the chamber lights into ghostly prisms. Their words came as flickers of color across faceted surfaces, translated into sound by hovering drones. "You are bold," the Thorin emissary pulsed. "Boldness is a currency, but it attracts predators." "Predators are already at the door," Elias replied. "What matters is whether you want them at your throat or mine." The Thorin flickered amber, mild amusement. "The Dominion overreaches. We observe. We do not interfere. You observe them annex 3 minor races in the last decade. Observation doesn't stop the tide." Elias leaned forward, voice quiet, but exposure might. The crystals shifted, the light within them deepening. "Bring proof. Then we speak." One by one, the factions showed their cards: caution, calculation, quiet interest. None offered open support. Not yet. But cracks had appeared in the Dominion's narrative, and Elias intended to wedge them wider. Later, in his assigned quarters, a sterile suite overlooking the star-sprayed void, Elias stood before a console, hands braced against the cold surface. Holographic files hovered in the air. Intercepted transmissions, forged signatures, shipment manifests with dates that contradicted official declarations. Mara set a steaming cup of kava beside him. "You're certain these are real?" "They were buried deep," Elias said. "Too deep for coincidence. Someone inside their Ministry of Expansion fed them to our scouts months ago. Whoever they were, they wanted this to surface." "Why?" she asked. "To force the confrontation we're in now," he said, eyes narrowing. "They want us to resist, either to fracture the Dominion from within or to justify a purge." Mara studied him. "So which is it?" Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the central file, a grainy scan of a charter claiming Carthage inheritance over the Torvac corridor. The seal was genuine. The metadata was not. Creation date, 12 months ago. "Fabrication," he said at last. "They're manufacturing pretexts. And if they succeed, Earth becomes their cautionary tale." The console beeped, an incoming secure channel. Elias accepted. A voice rasped through static. "Grant," it said. Deep, cold, unmistakably Carthage. "You are being watched." "Envoy Reshk," Elias said smoothly, recognizing the tone. "One of Karthvek's advisors." "Watching is a poor substitute for winning." A low chuckle. "You mistake the Dominion's patience for weakness. The Sovereign offered you mercy. You offered insult. And yet, here you are calling me in the dark." Reshksis was sharp. "Withdraw your words before the Council convenes again. Sign the treaty, or we will carve the lesson into your colonies." 7 cycles. Elias reminded him, "I won't move an inch." The channel cut. Mara exhaled slowly. "They're pressing." "They're nervous," Elias corrected. "Threats are noise. Pressure means cracks." He turned from the console and stared out at the starfield. Somewhere out there, beyond cold space and shifting allegiances, Earth's fleets waited, green, untested, but not unready. 7 cycles was both an ultimatum and an opportunity. "Mara," he said quietly, "prepare a message for High Command. We need every scout tracing the Torvac archives, every archivist digging deeper. If we expose their lie, we don't just defend our worlds. We shift the balance." "And if we can't?" she asked. Elias's reflection in the glass was a shadow with steel eyes. "Then we do what humans have always done. We hold the line until something breaks, and we make sure it isn't us." Outside, the stars burned cold, indifferent witnesses to the storm gathering in their midst. Artificial night blanketed the orbital council citadel, though the station never truly slept. Its skeletal corridors pulsed with soft maintenance light, and distant docking bays echoed with the hiss of shuttles arriving under shadowed flags. Elias Grant moved through a server's wing with Lieutenant Marquez at his flank, their footsteps muffled by insulated flooring. Official meetings had ended. But the real negotiations thrive when the stars at their faces. The room he entered was smaller than the council hall, deliberately nondescript. Matte walls, a low oval table, no recorders except the one he brought. Around it sat 5 figures, envoys from neutral powers too cautious to take sides publicly. A Zalari trade delegate adjusted the crystalline mask over its narrow face. A gray-skinned Othan tactician folded 3-jointed arms. The others lingered in shadow, present by projection. Elias placed a slim case on the table and let it open with a soft click. Holographic files sprang to life. Forge maps, altered timelines, cargo manifests traced to Carthage supply lines. This, he began, voice even, is what their war rests on. Manufactured inheritance, fabricated claims. They want the Torvac corridor not for defense, but for its hypermineral veins. With them, they control a third of known FTL junctions. The Zalari flicked the talon toward the data. Evidence, yes, but evidence can be buried. Why risk their wrath to carry your burden? Because, Elias replied, if they succeed here, your borders are next. This isn't about humanity alone. It's about precedent. The Othan leaned forward, glossy eyes reflecting the files. And you? You stood in the hall and offered them war. I offered them a choice, Elias corrected. They chose threats. I intend to make them pay for that. A murmur rippled among the group. One by one, they reached toward the projection, transferring encrypted copies into their own devices. It wasn't allegiance, not yet, but it was momentum. Mara watched silently, reading the subtle shifts of body language. When the envoys departed, she spoke low. That's a start. But if the Dominion moves first, none of this will matter. It will, Elias said, if we have allies in place before their first shot. They returned to the upper decks hours later, the station quiet except for the distant hum of shield generators. There, waiting in the shadow of a column, was a Carthage officer, not one of the Sovereign's inner circle, but high enough to carry weight, armor-plated, eyes like slitted embers. Diplomat Grant. The alien rasped, walk with me. Mara tensed, hand brushing her sidearm. Elias gave a minute nod. Lead the way. They stepped into a side corridor, dim and narrow, the kind used for maintenance crews. The Carthage stopped near an observation slit overlooking the Loren's pale corona. You spoke boldly, the alien said. Too boldly. Elias studied him. Reshk sent you? The officer's crest twitched. Names matter little. I come with message. The Sovereign is displeased, but there are voices in Dominion who question his haste. Dissent, Elias said, not a question. Caution, the officer corrected. War is costly. If you provoke him further, you leave us no room to temper his hand. Elias's jaw tightened. Your Sovereign threatens 7 worlds. I didn't provoke that. The Carthage talon scraped the wall lightly, a sound like knives drawn slow. 7 cycles, human. Use them wisely, or bury your colonies. He left without another word, leaving the faint tang of ozone in the air. Mara exhaled through her teeth. That wasn't a warning. That was a leash. No, Elias murmured. That was a crack in the leash holder. By the 3rd cycle, covert preparations had begun. Human scouts ghosted into the outer sectors, mapping Dominion fleet movements. Freighters left civilian docks under sealed manifests, carrying not trade goods, but modular defense satellites. Elias sent coded dispatches through encrypted channels, their routes masked by neutral couriers. Each hour brought new fragments. Intercepted communiques, inconsistencies in Dominion star maps, silent pings from sympathetic observers. The web tightened. Late that night, Elias stood before the council chamber's vast windows. The stars beyond seemed cold and unreachable, yet their light was steady, older than empires, indifferent to their threats. Mara approached, tablet in hand. Fleet Command approved covert mobilization, she said. Outer colonies are reinforcing. Good, he said, eyes still on the void. If the Dominion strikes, we don't meet them scattered. You think they'll move before the 7 cycles? He shook his head. No, they want fear to work first. A chime interrupted them. A secure signal routed through a civilian network. Elias accepted it, and a familiar face flickered into view. Rear Admiral Soren Vale, speaking from the edge of human space. "Grant," Vale said without preamble, "we've intercepted something. Carthage transport flag is medical supply, but manifest doesn't match scans. Destination, Torvac corridor. Send it." Elias said. Data flowed across the screen. Containers marked as relief rations, in truth carrying phase plasma turrets. Prepositioning for occupation. Mara's lips thinned. They're already building their excuse. "Or their invasion," Elias replied. Vale's voice hardened. "Do we engage?" "Not yet," Elias said. "We're not the aggressor here. Hold shadow distance. Watch them." The transmission ended. Mara folded her arms. "Every move we make feels like a delay. Every move they make feels like desperation," Elias countered. "That's the difference." He turned from a window, his face carved in the glow of distant stars. "When the time comes, we strike with words first, steel second. But both must be ready." That night, in a quiet hall off the council's main artery, Elias met one last contact, a hooded figure with a translator drone hovering at its shoulder. Its species remained veiled, but the voice was dry and measured. "You are building a storm," it said. "Do you know where it will break?" "On the Dominion," Elias replied. "Where else?" The figure inclined its head. "Not always. Storms wander." It handed him a sealed data core, faintly warm to the touch. "Proof," it said. "Use it before the 7th cycle." When Elias returned to his quarters, he placed the core beside the other fragments. The mosaic was almost complete, a web of lies wide enough to strangle its maker. The council's grand chamber blazed with light again, but this time the air was sharper, tense, brittle, as though the walls themselves anticipated a fracture. Word of covert fleet movements had reached the delegates. Rumors spread like radiation. The Dominion stockpiling weapons under false flags, human scouts shadowing their convoys, neutral powers whispering in quiet halls. Elias Grant entered first, flanked by 2 aides and security detail, whose presence was more formality than protection. The Carthage delegation was already there. Sovereign Carthvex Zur sat motionless at the far end, claws resting on the table's edge, eyes fixed like targeting reticles. 7 cycles are not yet done, the sovereign said as Elias approached, his tone low, almost conversational. "Yet you stir the embers." "I stir nothing," Elias replied, taking his place at the central dais. The embers were lit long before we arrived. The room hushed. Representatives from a dozen empires leaned forward, waiting for the next strike. Carthvex's crest shifted. "You send scouts to my lanes. You whisper to merchants. You poison neutrality." Elias met his gaze steadily. "I investigate, because what you call tribute is theft dressed in ceremony." A ripple passed across the chamber. The Thorin emissary's crystalline surface pulsed faint blue. The Vale ambassador tilted its mirrored mask. The cracks Elias had worked to widen were showing. The sovereign's voice hardened. "Your kind plays at politics as hatchlings play at war. You will drown in your own defiance." Elias didn't flinch. "You forged a charter, sovereign, dated at 12 months past, and called it ancient law. We traced the forgery to your Ministry of Expansion. We intercepted your convoys armed for occupation before the first treaty was even drafted." Carthvex's claws scraped the stone. "Lies," he snarled, but the word carried too quickly, too forcefully, a denial born of pressure. Elias activated projector embedded in the dais. Holograms flared to life. Transport scans, falsified maps, metadata stripped bare. Lines connected dates, signatures, shipment paths. A pattern formed, unmistakable. Gasps rippled. One envoy whispered to another. A crystalline delegate flashed a sudden pulse of amber light. Revelation. "You speak of law," Elias said, voice steady. "This is what your law rests on. If the council allows us to stand, no border here means anything." For a moment, the sovereign said nothing. His scaled fingers tightened on the table's edge. Around him, his advisors shifted uneasily, tails flicking. One leaned close, hissing something sharp in their native tongue. Then Karthvek rose, slow and deliberate. The ceiling lights caught the serrated edges of his crest as it unfurled. "You mistake this chamber for a court," he said. "It is not. It is a place where power decides truth. And our power is older, greater than your fragile reach." "You've proven only that you fear exposure," Elias replied. The sovereign's head tilted slightly. "Fear? No. Contempt." He slammed a clawed hand against the table, the impact sending a tremor through the floor. "Council or not, we move. Your fleets will not stop us. Your allies will not shield you." Elias let the noise wash over him. He spoke only when the echoes faded. "You move and you stand alone." The words landed heavier than their volume. Behind him, the veiled delegate inclined its head faintly. The oathen tactician sent a discreet pulse across the network channels. Deals were forming, not openly, but enough to weigh the air. Karthvek's gaze narrowed. "You think to rally the scavengers against us?" "I don't need them to fight your war," Elias said. "I need them to see it for what it is." The sovereign's tail lashed once. "Then you have signed your own sentence." Elias stepped forward, voice lower now, meant only for the dais and the closest translators. "Perhaps. But understand this, sovereign. Humanity does not kneel for a lie." The chamber broke into competing noise. Envoys arguing, aides rushing to transmit updates to their capitals. Above it all, the sovereign turned, his armored retinue following in a hiss of plates and scales. At the threshold, he paused, his voice carrying like a blade drawn across stone. "5 cycles remain," he said. "Spend them as you will. When they end, so do your stars." He left. Elias exhaled slowly, only now allowing the tension to drain from his shoulders. Mara stepped to his side, her voice tight. "You expose him, but that wasn't a victory." "No," Elias said. "It was a wound." "And wounds bleed," she murmured. He gave a faint nod. "Yes, and predators bleed out faster than they expect." As the council chamber emptied, a low thrumming echoed through the station. The sound of distant fleets shifting position, their movements magnified across encrypted networks. In the private channels that followed, confirmations trickled in. 3 minor powers agreeing to observe human convoys, one offering shadowed supply routes, another passing along encrypted Dominion traffic. The web was no longer forming. It was tightening. Later, in a secure communications bay, Elias opened a channel to Fleet Command. Admiral Vale's face appeared, drawn and lit by the pale glow of tactical holos. "They're moving warships to the corridor," Vale reported. "No declaration. Just pressure." "Good," Elias said. "Good." Vale's brow furrowed. "You want them to escalate?" "I want them to reveal themselves before they choose their target," Elias corrected. "Every move they make now is on record." Vale studied him. "And if their next move is a strike, then we're no longer the accused," Elias said, with a line they tried to cross. The transmission ended. Elias remained still, staring at the fading light where the Admiral's image had been. Behind him, Mara shifted her weight. "They won't forget what you said today," she said. "They were never meant to," he replied. Outside, the stars seemed sharper, harder, as if the void itself had taken sides. The masks had fallen, and what stared back now was no longer diplomacy. It was the quiet before an empire gambled its future. The 7th cycle dawned on a station wrapped in unease. Docking lanes brimmed with transports claiming neutrality, their transponders whispering conflicting codes. Patrol routes crisscrossed like drawn blades. Somewhere in that tangle, the Dominion fleet waited, unseen but not unfelt. Elias Grant stood before the council's sealed doors, shoulders square beneath the weight of 1,000 watching systems. Beside him, Mara adjusted the encrypted case resting against her side. Its contents were neither weapon nor proof, and yet both. "They'll come armed," she murmured. "They'll come desperate," Elias corrected. "That's sharper." The doors parted. The chamber had shed ceremony. No banners, no softened light, only the cold white glare of judgment. Sovereign Karthvek sat at the head, armored fully now, scales like interlocked blades, crest arched high. His retinue filled the upper galleries, silent, poised. "You've used your cycles well," he said as Elias approached. "You've poisoned every corridor." "I've shown them what was already there," Elias replied. "You wrote the script." I read it aloud. Karthvek's claws drummed the table. "And now you'll be silenced." "No," Elias said simply. "Now we speak plainly." He opened the case. A single capsule rested inside, no larger than a clenched fist, its surface rippling faintly. A quantum relay, encoded with Dominion fleet orders intercepted by human scouts. Dates, targets, supply nodes, enough to redraw the war they denied planning. Elias placed it on the table between them. The chamber leaned closer. "This is your shadow war," he said. "Convoys loaded with shock troops. Coordinates of neutral ports marked for pacification. Not a defense plan. A conquest schedule." A murmur swept through the council. The Thorin emissaries glowed darkened to iron gray. The veiled delegate finally spoke, voice like glass against steel. "Sovereign, is this true?" Karthvek did not look away from Elias. "False archives," he said, "forged by scavengers." Elias reached across the capsule, tapped the sequence. Holograms flared. Encrypted Dominion channels. Signatures matched to the Sovereign's war ministry. Voice prints authenticated across a dozen spools. Karthvek's own command barked from projection. "Begin reclamation. Strike before they bind." The chamber erupted. Delegates rose. Translators blinked hot. Aides scrambled for instructions. In the chaos, the Sovereign's crest lowered a fraction. A hunter realizing the trap was not sprung but tightened. "You've burned your mask," Elias said quietly. "War or surrender. Choose before they choose for you." Karthvek's eyes glinted, not with fear but calculation. "You think I will kneel because you shout in a room of traitors?" "No," Elias replied. "I think you will kneel because your fleet will starve before it fires the first shot." He gestured to Mara. She activated a secondary feed. Dominion supply lines rerouted. Choke points collapsed by silent embargoes agreed in private channels. Fuel corridors had gone dark. Mineral shipments had vanished. Allies who had bowed now closed their gates. For the first time, the Sovereign's tale stilled completely. "This is war," Karthvek hissed. "No," Elias said. "This is the cost of lying to everyone at once." The chamber quieted. One by one, the neutral powers spoke, not in unity, but in convergence. Sanctions formalized, trade suspensions ratified, observers placed in every lane. Karthvek rose slowly. His shadow stretched long across the floor, but its edges no longer reached Elias. "You have humiliated a sovereign of the Dominion," he said, each word heavy as stone. "You will not see peace in your lifetime." "Perhaps not," Elias answered, "but my people will see freedom in theirs." The Sovereign's crest folded, a gesture not of respect but retreat. Without ceremony, he turned. His guards followed in a hiss of armor and simmering rage. Only when the last clawed footstep faded did the council exhale. Mara closed the case. "That was it?" she asked under her breath. "That was the last moment we needed." Elias said, "Wars don't always start with gunfire. Sometimes they start with silence. And sometimes," he glanced at the empty doorway, "they end with it." Hours later, in the private observation deck overlooking the station's dark side, the stars hung cold and unmoved. Fleet Command had confirmed. Dominion warships were withdrawing, their corridors fractured by lack of fuel and allies. No declaration followed, only the quiet shuffling of an empire nursing its wound. Mara joined him, her reflection faint in the glass. "You risked everything on one moment." "Not everything," Elias said. "Just our name. The rest was theirs to destroy." "Will they come again?" "Of course. Empires always return. But next time, they'll bleed first." She studied him. "You didn't threaten them. You didn't kill him. You just exposed him." Elias nodded. "Sometimes the sharpest blade is the truth everyone else was afraid to hold." He turned away from the stars, leaving them to their distance. Behind him, the relay stations pulsed with new traffic, alliances rewriting themselves, fragile but alive. Humanity had not won a war. It had prevented one by forcing the galaxy to sea. And in halls once ruled by fear, that was victory enough. End of Chapter 5, 1,000 words. This final chapter brings direct confrontation between Elias and the Sovereign, uses intelligence exposure and alliances as humanity's weapon, HFY core. Closes the arc with tension unbroken, yet war averted by pressure, not battle. A classic silent execution of power. Would you like me to now compile all 5 chapters into a seamless full book, 6,000, 6,500 words, ready for formatting, PDF, DOCX, EPUB? Expand with an epilogue that sets up a sequel, perhaps Aliens Plan Revenge. Humanity is ready. Create cover art, ultra-realistic 8K sci-fi for this book, or do all 3. Which path should we take next?